Yeah. Thanks for praying, Ryan. I hadn't heard this. Linda said this morning two missionaries in Haiti were killed yesterday. Is that right, Linda? You know, I hadn't heard that. A young couple. Okay, so I didn't feel that we could walk on from the worldview thing, and I think we needed to go back to it with those of you who are here today. So we talked about these two worldview. A worldview is just basically how you see the world, but how you see the world in such a way that it shapes your approach to the world. Okay, and we talked about, there are two, I'm sure there are others, but there are two that I mentioned, two worldviews. Does anyone remember? Blueprint worldview. Oops. So blueprint worldview, rooted in Augustine in the sort of 4th, 5th century, but Calvin really liked him and based some of his kind of what they call reformed thinking on Augustinian kind of theology. So it's a blueprint. Basically, it says God's in control. It says that he's developed, it says that, a quote, it says, the truth that God alone is eternal, that God is self-sufficient within his own triune identity apart from the world, and that God is altogether omnipotent, omniscient, and thus God is sovereign over world history. Now, I would agree with some of that, but it's if your view is God is sovereign over world history, how does that shape how we then view some pretty horrid things in world history? So if that's your worldview, then it's going to shape how you view things like the Holocaust or Rwanda or what happens, awful things that happened to people behind closed doors, you know. So, and the blueprint worldview, that it's all set out. Well, it again, you know, if that's your worldview, then you've got to work hard. And people, don't get me wrong, people do work very hard. I got a book on suffering from someone from this camp. Somebody gave it to me, and I started reading it. I was just like, I can't see this. Personally, I can't go with it. So there's a blueprint worldview, and then there is what we could call remember the second one? Warfare worldview. Jenny, please don't comment about how I'm writing my letters today. I could sense it. We had a long conversation. Yeah. Okay. The theme of God seeking to establish his sovereign will, his kingdom on earth over and against forces that are opposed to him. It's the prevalent model, I would say, in the New Testament. So there is a battle raging. And sometimes this battle is won and sometimes it's lost. And I don't understand how that works, but I think there is a battle raging. And I think that the New Testament gives us this. So, it's pretty obvious as I go through what I'm going to go through today that this is the world view that I ascribe to. But I think there's elements of this in terms of, who God is that we've got to work out a little bit. I don't want to dismiss that. Just when we say God is sovereign, we've got to work out what that means. Yeah? God is in control. We've got to work out what that means. Because sometimes it's said, and I'm not sure people really stop and think. So that's I wanted to remind us of that. But that's what this article about. It's not an article, it's 3 pages from a book. And I tell you, I woke up last week, I sat at my study in my prayer time, and this book was on the side, and it was the strangest thing. Page 90. That's what the Holy Spirit said to me. I really felt page 90. And I picked it up, and that's page 90 and 91. Okay? And that's why I think God doesn't quite want us to move on from understanding the impact of our worldview. I'm going to give you a moment to just skip. I hate it when people give me articles to read in places like this. I need silence to read. But I'll give you a few moments to have a look at it. But what I want us to think about is the influence that this has upon our approach to life in general. But also I want you to think about some of the almost unspoken worldviews that you've just picked up along the way, and we just automatically work towards, they shape us without even really thinking about it. So spend a moment, just read through. You spot the speed readers, can't you? Good. I was trying to turn it off as I went in there. I was being very careful to be quiet as well. Okay. I'm back on, sorry. Thank you, Graham. I did try. How's that sound? I could tell you a really funny experience. Do you remember? Someone who forgot themselves. And we went to the bathroom with them on video phone. And we all know him. Okay. Sorry, I really don't like giving you lots of things to read in the middle. But have you got the gist of what is being said here? What do you think? Does it make sense? Does anyone got any comments? Can anyone see this, how this has affected them in some ways in terms of their particular worldviews? I particularly was taken with the time it takes to change our worldview. And I would say we've been on a journey of a worldview change in our church, but it's taking 12 years. We started on this journey using those 5 points of Arise. How many we started developing them? 10 years ago? This is about worldview change. So one of the key worldviews that most of you in this room, some of you younger guys would probably not be as influenced as some of us who are a little older, but we have had so I was born in 1970, so I've got 1 foot in something called modernity, and I've got 1 foot in something called postmodernity. Okay, I straddled it because I was born in this time of transition, which that would be the case for a lot of us in this room. Some of us would be born very much in postmodernity, and that would be the worldview which we were brought up with. So modernity says reason is king. If you can't explain it, it ain't worth knowing. So if you think about how things like Enlightenment, the Industrial Revolution, the printing press, so from the 18th century and beyond, probably 17th century with the Reformation. So basically there's this massive shift in culture and society where reason has become the most important thing. If you can't explain it, it ain't worth knowing. That's the worldview. Now think about the church. What's the big event every time we gather? What's the thing that realistically most churches gather around? It's the sermon. It's the preaching of the word. It's the what can be described, explained. Can we switch that off, Janet? 'Cause there's a okay. It's what can be explained. So what happened is, anyway, what happened is, in the 60s, 70s, and into the 80s, what happened is that we realized we can't explain everything. People are still dying from cancer. We don't have the solutions. Science is not the be-all and end-all. So people are starting to say, whoa. So there's this transition into a time where mystery is a little bit more acceptable. But just go back to the modernist thing. So we believe in a supernatural God, don't we? Amen. Yeah? We believe in a supernatural God. And who does supernatural things that we cannot explain. But modernity says it ain't worth knowing unless we can explain it. So what happens to the supernatural God? The worldview puts the supernatural God in a series of doctrines, beliefs, and most of us have kind of grown up with this. Where does that leave the gifts of the Spirit?
Nowhere, really.
It-
Does it put that belief
Yeah, yeah,
in the doctrine?
that's right. It's
Not relevant.
a whole doctrine called cessationism sprung up in the sort of 17th, 18th century. A bloke called Darby. A whole doctrine around cessationism. Cessationism says this: the work of the Spirit was for the early church. And once we got the Bible, or once the apostles were dead, that was the end of the supernatural gifts of the Spirit. We've got the Word now, that's all we need. Can you see how a worldview influences a way of thinking which has impacted many of us? So if I were to start speaking to you now, and I was speaking in tongues, some people would be completely okay with it. Some people would be going, you know, because it's too weird. And it's too weird. And that's what's beautiful about it. Because it do you see what I'm saying? That the worldview, it challenges it. You know, what happened to Jen when you were healed the other day? Or Ginny? I've got no explanation for it. So if we can't explain it, let's just put it away. Let's lock it in the past. I'm spending a long time on this, but I really do think we need to understand that our worldview affects how we come at the things that we're talking about today. Any questions, any comments?
So that's quite differently. I was brought up in Pentecost church.
Yeah.
I accepted that. It took me a while to click that actually there are people that actually don't believe that. They didn't believe that the Spirit was given for
Yep.
them.
Yep.
They thought it stopped.
Yep.
I guess when Christ went to heaven, did it? That's it.
Some would say when the apostles died, because obviously they were doing the miracles,
Yeah.
or when when the Bible was complete in the 4th century. So when canon of Scripture was established, right, this is it, and they would say, right, okay, that's this cessation, this period is now done. So it's like sort of there are these dispensations. Is that right, Frank? That's what they call them, dispensations, and that dispensation is now done. We're into this new dispensation. Mm. Yeah.
Almost being in that place, like on my own.
Yeah.
Thinking these things are
Mm.
real,
Mm.
but the rest of the world telling me they're not.
Yeah. Me and Frank were chatting earlier about Toronto. Everyone, when I'm talking about Toronto, everyone knows kind of what I'm talking about, in that there was this move of God in the late 80s, and how to describe it? It was a real emphasis and focus upon God's loving heart, but it was accompanied by some manifestations of the Spirit that made people go, ooh, because it really pushed these buttons that we're talking about today. I was saying, because there was a conversation I was part of this week online, and somebody had said, we are seeing miracles in our church. And I'm like, come on. First comment, I'm not supposed to say this because it's supposed to be a closed group, but I'm not telling you which group it is. First comment was, oh, really, Toronto, I saw the dangers of it, and I'm like, I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I think there was another agenda there, but ultimately, we were talking about how, for me, when it was all happening, I sadly listened to some of the stuff going on around it. You know, because some of it was of God and some of it wasn't. That's the same with any move of God. That's the same any Sunday here on you know, is everything that happens in this place on a Sunday morning of God? No. Is some of it? Most definitely yes. Is some of it stirred up in people's hearts because they want it so desperately? And you know, sometimes yes. That's the way it goes. Because we're all muddly, messed up humans. But I missed. Frank, you didn't. You went 3 times. Everyone I spoke to who went to Toronto was never the same again. And yes, it was a bit bonkers. But isn't this book a bit bonkers in places? Isn't it? Doesn't some weird stuff happen in there? But if we're carrying this, well, if we can't explain it, it ain't worth knowing, you can see why people would be dismissive of a move of God that's rooted in the charismatic movement or in the charismatic, spirit-filled things of God. Does that make sense, Michelle?
I'm like confused. When you come, will be a bunch drop down.
Yeah.
Quite elderly. You really and they said it would take 6 months to get better. The doctors. So the man in charge, the leaders, he said, right, we're going to pray today for relative purity. But when you come back next week, it will be normal. So he spoke life over her and he said he prayed life over him, that she was revealed and that she was different. And the next week she came back and prayed for him. He said we're going to believe. It's like putting it into action. Putting your faith into action and seeing the result.
Mm.
It works.
Yeah.
Because I mean they said reach 6 months you need all this
Yeah,
other
yeah,
stuff
yeah, yeah.
and that, you know.
Yeah, yeah. And to be honest with you, I could go around this room, and many in this room could tell stories, testimonies of miracles. Yeah, because our God is a supernatural God.
Is that right?
Yeah, of course it was. Who doesn't want to hear about things like that? I've got one bubbling up in me. Shall I tell the story about when me and Holly were walking down the hill while she's here? I was hobbling. My knee was a mess. I don't know what I'd done to it, but we were hobbling along, and she just looks up at me at 7 or 8. Daddy, what's wrong? Oh, I've got a really painful knee. Well, we will pray. Jesus, heal Daddy's knee. Like that.
No.
Like that. Seriously. And you know, we can try and explain it away, and often that's what happens. Why? Because we're coming out of this worldview, this period in history where if we can't explain it, it's not worth knowing. Okay? It's not helped the church. It's not helped it. We've gathered around it. Oh, fascinating me. If we were in the old church building, I could point to a pulpit. The classic building, the way our architecture. Who's been to TMC? You remember the True Methodist Church? You walk through the door. What's the first thing you see? The pulpit. I preached in that pulpit. I got giddy because I was so high. But every one of those 600 seats can see and hear what? What was described? What was explained? Because the worldview says if it ain't worth describing, you can't describe it, it ain't worth knowing. I'm not saying that means that there's no miracles or supernatural things in these places. And you hear about these 18th, 19th century preachers where they would preach. Wesley, people would gather and he would preach and stuff would happen. We'll talk about that in a moment. But just think about your worldview. And I want you to be honest with yourself about the worldview that you have and some of the influences that may have impacted that. And how that maybe affects how you look at some things that we see, hear, I'll be honest, sometimes I have to stop myself. When I'm going to pray for healing, I have got a battle going on in my head that's rooted in a worldview that I was born into. I'm just being honest. Yeah. Yeah, totally. Yeah. Yeah. So, last time, I want to try and just develop our understanding of the worldview we're in the light of this warfare worldview, because I think this more describes the place we're in. Do you remember last time we talked about this, how Paul talks about his friend who got caught up in a third heaven? Okay? Everyone knows it was Paul. He was probably just being a bit humble. But it talks about him being caught up in a third heaven. This third heaven is where God lives. It's a place of purity. It's a place of perfection. It's where Christ is. And I believe it's where we're seated with him. It says we are seated with him where? Heavenly places. I don't fully understand that, but it says it on more than one occasion in the New Testament that you are seated with him in heavenly places. As part of our reality, part of our spirituality is seated in this place with Christ. And then it also talks in the Bible about a first heaven. It talks about the sun, moon, and stars. And I would say that this is our physical reality. Now, it doesn't use this phrase, second heaven, but again, we looked at this bit more detail last time. There were a couple of passages in Scripture that describe this realm that is, I don't even want to say in between. I don't think we can look at it this way. It's like that, or, it doesn't work that way. We're trying to use human language to describe. Again, here goes, if you can't describe it, it ain't worth knowing. Maybe we haven't talked enough about this. This is the place, I would say, where the battle rages, where there is demonic and angelic battle. Do you remember the first week I talked about how God created heaven and earth, and it talks about how there was a dome, a firmament, and how we don't have, the word is rakaya in the Hebrew, and there's no word for it other than our understanding being in its original language like a blacksmith taking a sheet of precious metal and banging it out so thin that it's almost a division, but it's almost like not a division. It's there, but it's not there. It's and I think that is kind of the description of what this place and this place. There is this realm around us where there is a battle raging. This one, okay? And we see the influence and impact of it daily through all sorts of different ways. Yeah? Are we all right? So what we said, the church is here. The church is here, but we're seated here. But we've got this bit here. So what I want you to do is look at those 4 verses on the back. If you just go to the back page, can you, on your tables, with this picture in mind, if the church is here in the first heaven, and there's a third heaven where God lives and we're seated with him, and then there's a second heaven where this battle is raging, that it's here and now in this room. I would say there's a battle raging, because as soon as we get this, it changes how we do the church. It changes how we do ministry. It changes how we view our whole approach to life. Our whole worldview changes. So read, maybe just don't start at 1. Could you do the first one here, second one, third one, fourth one, first one, second one. Is that all right? Just spend a few minutes reading that, and what are the implications of that, what you're reading, in the light of this? Does that make sense? Okay? Just spend a few minutes doing that, and then we'll have a think about it. So just chat about it on your tables. You're right, Jack. Your journey all right? Yeah. Just think about what the implications are for you as well. What does this mean for you? It's like, what does this tell us? What does this tell us about the world? What does this tell us about God? But what does it mean, the so what question? What does this mean to how I pray? What does this mean to how I function or, live and work? And Steve, are you going to ask me a question? Okay. We'll have a break in a moment. Right. Has everyone had enough time? A few little comfort breaks going on. We'll break. We'll have a discussion about this, and then we'll break and come back for the sort of final bit of teaching. But just we'll wait for the guys to come back, and then you guys had Daniel 10 here, and you guys had Daniel 10 here. I think Daniel 10 is great because I think you see this clearer than anywhere. You really see it. I love the way he prayed for 21 days. And then the angel comes and says, for 21 days I was, wrestling. So I'm probably telling you what you've been discussing. So we'll just wait for a moment. Please do chip in as we go. If you think something's you want to add to what I'm saying, or if you want to question what I'm saying, let's have a conversation because I want this to really shape. It is shaping who we are as a church, and I want you to understand why and how. And okay, I think the guys will be joining us. So, Daniel 10. What did it tell us? What were you talking about? Guys, do you want to hear? Right, hang on a sec. Right, so Daniel 10. Say that again, Ryan. Right. Yeah. I love it. Yeah. It was a really good point.
Best point you've heard today.
The best point. Better than anything anyone else has said. Nathan, over to you. Persistence in prayer, wasn't it? That's what you were saying.
Yeah, about being persistent in prayer, being patient, trusting that God has heard you, just because you haven't had an instant answer. So basically, just being persistent, patient, and having the faith to keep listening and waiting and trusting on God.
Yeah. Do you want to add anything? Do you want to? What? Yeah.
And I think God sends angels, who knows? I think God sends mighty powers to assist us in battle.
Yep.
Some we recognise, some we don't.
You said.
I like the beginning where it says, don't be afraid.
Yep.
Because I think fear about what might happen in the battle can hinder us.
Yep.
I like the bit about at the end about in the future, God, He's revealing that to us.
Yeah. Do you want to add anything?
Yeah, if you go back to verse 2, Daniel mourned and fasted for 21 days.
Yeah.
So, we shouldn't be surprised that fight in the second heaven was 21 days, 3 weeks.
Absolutely. So, I mean, this is what I think. Again, tell me if you think I'm wrong. Daniel prayed. God answered. and there's this wrestling, and then there was impact. So there was a time of prayer and fasting. I think that's really important. That there was an impact here upon here, and then this had an impact upon our natural realm. So let's go on. You guys had the next one, which was Ephesians 3. Can you hand that over? Anything?
I guess it's similar, but kind of the other way around. So we've got the manifold wisdom of God from the third heaven being made known through the church in the first heaven to the second heaven.
Yeah.
So it's like that influence. It's not, I guess it's not just like a hierarchy of like authority from third, second to first. It's like God, the manifold wisdom of God is made known through the first heaven to the second. So it's saying something about the authority of us in the first heaven over the battle that's raging in the second.
You should preach.
We kind of also talked about the fact that it's like it's not out of our hands, I guess. Like that it's not God will do it, it will happen in a second, and then kind of we'll see the impact of it. That actually we don't just have to sit and wait and see what God does with it, but that we have the authority to speak into it and see the change.
Yes, so you both used the word authority, which we're going to preach on in a few weeks' time. You guys here, did you have 3:10? Do you want to pass the mic round? Susie, would you? Do you want to add anything?
We were just saying that it's interesting that God communicates to the church first before communicating to the angelic realm, if that makes sense. Like he trusts us with that. And the fact that it's the manifold wisdom of God, so it's not just one angle of God's wisdom, it's every single area of God's wisdom comes directly to us before it seeps up. If that makes sense. And it's for like eternity. That was the other thing. I don't know.
I love this passage, and it puzzles me that I was never taught on this when I was at college. I didn't hear a sermon on it that I can remember for many, many years. Yet, I've been leading the church, or a church, in one way, shape, or form for probably 15 years before I really started to meditate on what this meant. It's like, what is the church? Well, I think what we have here is probably the clearest description of what God wants for his church than you get anywhere in the Bible. Yet, for years and years and years, we didn't talk about it. And even now, I talk to people, because this is my life, this is it now, this is what I want to know. And I'll talk to people and they'll go, where's that? Where's that? Where's that verse? Where does it say that? And because I totally believe that when we get this, everything changes. When we understand that God's intent for his church is that through the church, that's us, we will display his manifold wisdom. Okay, so we've got the manifold wisdom coming down. Yeah? And our job is to display that, we'll talk about that in a moment, to this realm. Yeah? And what happens then is this realm affects this realm. Okay? So the wisdom comes from God. We declare it, we display it, we speak it, we have authority over this realm, and that then impacts the natural realm in which we live. Does that make sense?
Yeah, there's lots of good stuff. Can I just say that it's possible for a critical word to come back
Absolutely.
and affect
Yeah,
the
yeah.
church and the body of Christ, and we need to be really careful about
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
You know, a doubting word.
Mm. Yeah, totally. And unbelief. And all sorts. Okay? Sorry. Yeah. It's huge, isn't it? Yeah. Yeah, yeah. Scary, that, isn't it? Yeah. But absolutely right. You know, when the prodigal son returns, and that we haven't sung it for ages. There's that song. He puts a ring upon my finger, puts a cloak upon my back. He says, he puts, he kisses, and he puts shoes on my feet. So shoes, I'm not a slave anymore because sons and daughters wear shoes. A cloak is the family cloak. I'm part of the family. A kiss is restoration. The ring on my finger is hugely significant because it was the signet ring. It was the ring that says, you're about the Father's business now, and I've given you authority. That's what the ring is, like a stamp. It's like a boom. You have authority to do my business. This is a huge statement of trust, which is what you're saying, Lorna. It's saying, the responsibility that goes with that is huge. So let's look at these two. Matthew 16. Who looked at that? At the back there. Yeah. We'll send the microphone back and...
Okay. This one is round and round and round in circles. This one is. It's up, down, and backwards and forwards. But the couple of things that really struck me is the question is, who do you say I am?
Yeah.
Because then we know that he's in the third heaven, but the influence that then comes down, and how we deal with that when we actually say, who do you say I am, has this massive impact on how we are in the kingdom. And then you come right down to almost the last passage where it says, I'll give you the keys of the kingdom of heaven. Whatever you bind on earth will be bound in heaven. Whatever you loose on earth will be loosed in heaven. That all comes from who do you say I am.
Yeah, totally. So, talking about this tomorrow. So we've got the church here, and we have to put Jesus as the foundation of the church, because it's the revelation of who Jesus is that Jesus says, on this rock I will build my church. So it's the revelation of who Jesus is, but then again from that place he says, well, you can bind and loose. That's what it says, isn't it? I'll give you the keys to the kingdom of heaven. Whatever you bind on earth. Really interesting, this passage. Always read it with the footnote. You got the little footnote there in your Bible, Linda. What does it say? All have been. So I will give you the keys to the kingdom of heaven. Whatever you bind on earth is that which has been bound on earth. So that which would be bound in heaven, and whatever you loose on earth is that which would have been loosed in heaven. So we can pray, yeah, like this. Well, I think you're right. It is. This is a cycle because it's happening, But it's something there. Just to make it simple, there is this. We have the keys to the kingdom. We can pray and take authority. There's that word again, and we can release the reality of here back down to there. I'd say there's a little bit of the middle there as well, actually. But from that, so what you release on earth is that which is released in heaven. Your kingdom come, your will be done on earth as it is in heaven. What you bind on earth is that which is bound in heaven. So we're praying heaven's reality into our reality. Does that make sense? That's the keys. We've been given the keys to the kingdom. That makes sense. I think it kind of makes sense here sometimes. I'm still really wanting it to get here and to get here. Well, that's a bit like the Daniel passage, isn't it? It's like, there's something in that dynamic. It's like, does God need prayer? We asked that question on Tuesday evening at the prayer course. Does God need prayer? And there was a mixture of responses. If we don't pray, so does God need prayer? I would say yes. I would say we started the last session on the church. When the church pulls out, moves away, a community is lesser for it because it doesn't have this. You look at our inner cities. The church withdrew to the suburbs. Yeah? And look what's happened to our inner cities. They're a mess. Lots of them. Yeah. Or, yes, I would read it. I think read it with the footnote.
Yeah.
That which is.
But it says that God revealed it. A Father has revealed it to you.
Mm. Yeah.
And you bind and loose whatever happened in the second heaven, which influences earth. So it comes to the same model then.
Mm. I think it can. I haven't thought about it, but I've always read it with I read it with the footnote, which is that which has been bound, and that which has been loosed. I think you can read it both ways, but I would say it's about bringing that reality into this one, and I think that doesn't happen separate from the second. But again, we start getting into this. My brain can't cope. But historically, we've said, oh my God, I can't explain this. So we don't go there. Just stick with what we can explain, and we're lesser for it, I think. But I think you're probably right, Nick, and I think we can come at it in different ways. Okay, that final verse, because we need to have a little break, because time is pressing on, crikey. Similarly, really, isn't it? Yeah. But, again, I tell you, okay, so take Matthew 19, all right, and let's jump back to Matthew 16, where it says, you are the, no, hang on. Where does it say it? Hang on. Okay. It says, and I tell you that you are Peter, and on this rock I will build my church. Okay? So we've got the word church there, one of only 3 references to the church in the whole of the Gospels. And then the word for church is ecclesia. The understanding of the ecclesia is assumed, possibly. Why didn't Jesus say more? Well, I think, some have suggested he didn't say more because he assumed everybody knew what the ecclesia was. There are these little groups within culture of a community, and they were the ecclesia. It was a Roman group, or the Greeks had theirs. I think they were called covenantus or something like that. I'd have to go back to my notes too. But They were groups who had authority to serve and to rule in any given community. And they would have the authority of the governor to do that. They were in the marketplace. And here's the thing. I didn't know this till recently. I was reading about this. It says 2 or 3 of them was enough. That's the minimum, 2 or 3. So a group of 2 or 3 would have influence authority of the governor in that particular community. And maybe that's why it says that if 2 of you on earth agree, is that the basis of that authority. So I think Jesus potentially is making this assumption that the readers will understand what the ecclesia was. Little groups of influential people bringing about transformation within their community. And he says, I give you authority. Not of the governor, but of heaven. Here's the keys. And what you release of this will be released. What is bound here, you can bind here. Okay? Should we have a break? Is that all right?